few months ago, I was having coffee with our own Larissa Hinman. And by the way, if you've never sat down and had a conversation over coffee with Larissa, you should. It's something that I think everyone should experience at least once over the course of their lives. I don't recall exactly how the conversation turned to this subject, but we eventually came to discuss the topic of fathers and fatherhood more generally. I've always had a great respect for Larissa's insight in many areas. But as we spoke on the subject of fathers, there was a special earnestness and a passion in her words as she spoke of her own experiences of fatherhood, coming from the perspective of a daughter and a mother. It was a moving conversation, and it actually inspired me to ask Larissa to speak on the subject here from this pulpit on Father's Day. I really appreciate Larissa being willing to come before all of us to share from her heart these memories and sentiments. So let's all give her a warm welcome this morning.
Hello, happy Father's Day, and thank you so much for having me. So before I start, can I just tell you what bugs me about Father's Day? As you saw my beautiful children make a scene this morning, what bugs me the most about this whole situation is that I carried them in my body for 10 months. 9 months is a myth, just by the way. 10 months. I nursed him for a year and a half. And you know who their favorite person is? Happy Father's Day! But let me tell you why this doesn't bug me too much. It was nothing short of incredible luck that I was born to a handsome, strong, and kind man who was both loving and lovable father. My first memories of my father include me as a little child sitting in the palm of his hand, facing him, my small hands wrapped around his huge biceps. He was so strong that he could lift me up and down with his one hand if he were curling a dumbbell. I actually remember counting individual muscles in his arm as each of them flexed in turn as he lifted me up and down, up and down. I recall my mother saying, "You know, you'll not be able to do this forever," probably to me. "You're right," my dad replied. "Someday I may need to use both hands, but she will always find support in me." My father was an officer in the Russian army and had to be absent a lot. Nevertheless, when he was home, he was always fully engaged. Dad went to all my dance recitals, school plays, even the most boring math competitions. I still can't balance the checkbook, by the way. Sorry. My dad was incredibly proud of my most minor accomplishments. When I got in trouble in school, which I got in trouble in school a lot, it was my father, not my mother, who went to meet with my teachers and the principal. He taught me how to ride a bike, how to swim, how to do fractions, but there are two lessons that he taught me that resonate with me to this day. First, do the right thing. Stand up for your friends, even when it's wrong. One time at school, a boy seated at the desk in front of me was teasing my friend. He was laughing and rocking in his chair. I was so mad how joyful he was for making my friend cry that I got up and pulled the chair from underneath him. The boy fell hard, ended up with a bloody nose. I got into so much trouble. But no one dared to mess with me or my friends after that. My father, true to form, put on his uniform. He looked very formidable in it. He went to meet he went to the school. He met with the teachers. He met with the administrators. He even met with the boy in question. After learning the whole story, he promised them that he would bestow the toughest punishment on me. I went home shaking with fear. When I got home, my father looked at me and said, "Fear is the beast that you have to conquer." Then he said, "Now I'm going to teach you how to kick a chair from underneath somebody without them ever knowing it." The second important lesson I learned from my father: know your worth and have self-esteem. When I was 11 years old, like many 11-year-olds, my dissatisfaction with my appearance was all-encompassing. I would constantly talk about how I hated the way I look. Finally, one day, Dad told me, I was born beautiful, and everyone knows I'm beautiful. But if I tell them that I'm ugly, then everyone will treat me as such. He forced me to sit in front of a mirror and say 11 times, "I'm beautiful," without ever cracking a smile, breaking down in tears. It was so hard to do. I begged him not to make me do it. It was one of the hardest psychological exercises I have ever endured. But because of that exercise, because of my father, I learned how to see myself as beautiful. As I said earlier, I was incredibly lucky to be a daughter of such a great dad. But my good fortune got even better when I chose Brett to be my husband, because he became the most wonderful father I have ever met. When Brett and I started talking about getting married, Brett wanted to ask my dad for my hand in marriage. Unfortunately, it was only possible via Skype, with me acting as a translator. I remember how excited my daddy was when he saw Brett on the screen. He kept talking loudly, laughing, joking. I had to interrupt him to tell him that Brett had a very important question for him. Dad laughed even louder and he yelled, "If she chose you and she called you mine, you have no choice but to be hers." And he said, "And you're one lucky SOB," except he didn't say SOB. He also said something like, "Why are you still talking to me? You'll make me beautiful grandbabies, so go make me some grandbabies. I am ready to be a grandfather." Which is exactly what I did. As Brett held a baby in his arms for the first time, the feeling of enormous love was overwhelming. Seeing my strong, sometimes stoic husband cry for the first time was my greatest source of joy. Every day, Brett blesses our family with too many selfless, loving gestures to even count. Every day, everything he does with our daughters, every word he speaks to them, is filled with love and encouragement. But one example that I will never forget happened back when I was still breastfeeding Sabella and Sophia was still very little. The entire family fell ill with horrible virus. Needless to say, physically, it was a very challenging time. I was beyond exhausted. My wonderful hubby sent me to bed while he stayed up with our girls, trying to soothe them, rocking them in my nursing chair. In the morning, when I got up rested, I found Brett cradling both girls in his arms. All three were asleep in my rocking chair. From these two fathers, my dad and Brett, I've learned so much. I have learned that when raising a child, in addition to kindness and encouragement, sometimes the most beneficial lessons need to be a little bit harsh. I have learned how father's love can help a little girl know she's beautiful. I have learned that acts of love, especially memorable, when one's well-being is compromised, because of those acts of love are also acts of sacrifice. To all of you who are blessed to be a father, but especially to those who are fathers of young women, I would like to give you these words of insight from a daughter and a mother. The most important thing you can do for your child is to be there. Be there and be blessed with the purest form of love there is. Please know, she will love you forever. And when you are gone, she will miss you forever. Your children are your legacy and your blessing. Thank you.
There's not much I can add to what Larissa has shared with us regarding the importance of fathers and the many roles that they play in each of our lives. Nevertheless, as we begin to close out today, I would like to take a moment and share a few thoughts that I have been reflecting on of late. I think that one of the reasons that Larissa's take on fathers struck me so powerfully is not because I felt a deep resonance with her words and experiences, but rather because I actually felt none. I have to admit that I have a bit of an impediment when it comes to reflecting on fatherhood and the importance of fathers, because I'm one of those folks that didn't have a particularly good one growing up. Now, there is an old bit of wisdom that seasoned pastors sometimes pass on to young ministers. Preach from your scars, never your wounds. I think it's good advice, and I certainly try to apply that in my ministry as best I can. So I have to recognize that the topic of fatherhood was once a reminder of a deep wound for me. It has healed, of that I am certain, but I must recognize that a scar remains. And it is a scar that perhaps has skewed the way that I myself think about fatherhood. And sometimes I wonder if my experiences have left me with a somewhat biased perspective, leaving me ill-equipped to, for example, give y'all a rousing, inspiring message lauding fatherhood on a day such as today. So thank goodness that Larissa was here to be able to share something, because otherwise you would have had to have listened to me give a sermon about the psychological consequences and theological implications of when fathers fail, most likely wrapped around an analysis of the recent Marvel superheroes movie Guardians of the Galaxy 2. I might still do that sermon someday. Father's Day has always been a complicated day for me, filled with a lot of emotions and thoughts and questions. And while many spend the day celebrating with their fathers for being celebrated, I spend much of the day reflecting on questions like, how did my negative experiences with my own father subconsciously influence my appreciation and apprehension of God, first presented to me in the Judeo-Christian tradition as a metaphoric heavenly Father? How did my early understanding of my so-called heavenly Father possibly prejudice my thinking about the imperfections and failures of my earthly father? How has all of this affected my ability to be a good father to my two daughters? There are many of us who may be dealing with similar complicated questions and feelings on Father's Day. And as Meg shared with us so eloquently, that's okay. Years ago, when I would listen to stories of great fathers, kind of like the ones that Larissa shared with us today, my first reaction was almost always envy. And maybe that was followed by a little bit of anger, because I didn't get to experience those kinds of stories myself. But as I've gotten older, and hopefully a little wiser, as the wounds have had a little bit of time to heal, I've come to realize that I did, in fact, have stories of great fathers just like that. Like that time when I first became a high school English teacher, That first year, I was in way over my head. I didn't know what I was doing, and one of the older male teachers took me under his wing. He gave me refuge in his classroom in the morning during my planning period. He helped me survive when all I wanted to do was to give up. Or like the way my uncle took me under his wing and taught me how to play both basketball and guitar. I remember how we jammed out to both Jethro Tull and James Taylor. I remember long nights at playground basketball courts where he would feed me pass after pass after pass until I could routinely bury three-pointers from the corner like Reggie Miller. Almost like Reggie Miller. Or that one time when, as a teenager, after I had alienated myself from some of the adults in my church, after I had gone public with some of my more progressive, unorthodox, borderline heretical views, the associate pastor, who was also the music minister and the youth pastor, there before hundreds of people during Sunday morning worship in front of the very people offended at me, took off his guitar, stepped down from the stage in the middle of the service, and he wrapped his arms around me in an embrace as if to tell everyone, back off, he's mine. Fathers can come in many different forms, and I've come to realize that over the course of my life, I have been blessed to have many. I have never been without a good father, or a good mother, or a good brother, or a good sister, a daughter, a son, and right now, a lot of them are seated in this sanctuary. Blood may be thicker than water, but I have found that spirit is thicker than both. And church has always been where I have found kindred spirits. And I suspect that may be true for a lot of you this morning as well. To me, that's what church is about. That's what this church is about. At the end of the day, you're not coming here just to hear my sermons. You're not coming here just to listen to the music or just to enjoy the architecture. If those are the only reasons you're here, frankly, you're probably not going to stay long. You're here looking for someone to love. You're here looking for someone to love you. Now, you've got to be real vulnerable to admit that, but I'm going to guess that's what most of us here want. We are the people who are blessed to need other people. And that desire to love and be loved is the itch that beloved community can scratch. Someone in this wide world has loved you like a father. If not, I promise you that there is someone in this wide world who will. Perhaps they are seated in this room today. To all of our fathers, whomever you may be, whatever form you may take, we thank you. Happy Father's Day, and blessed be.